Thank you, Chairman Schweikert, members of the committee. My name is
As you said, I'm a research fellow at Stanford University, Hoover Institution. I'm also a visiting research fellow at the Pacific Legal Foundation. My testimony today highlights 4 key points. First, regulatory accumulation slows investment, innovation, and productivity growth. Second, regulations can hinder emerging technologies. Third, permitting delays significantly hamper productivity growth. And fourth, uniform federal regulations are sometimes necessary to avoid a fragmented regulatory landscape. But first, let's discuss regulatory accumulation. Since 1970, regulatory restrictions, words shall and must and may not, occurring in code of federal regulations, have grown from about 400,000 on the books to about 1.1 million today. A study that I published in 2020 showed that this accumulation of regulations slows economic growth by nearly 1 percentage point annually. Specifically, and relevant to this hearing today, the study found that the buildup of federal rules over time distorted business investment decisions. These investments include research and development expenditures, new machinery, new buildings, locations, and new business formation itself. In the long run, such business investments are key drivers of innovation and therefore productivity growth. So regulation, by distorting and sometimes deterring business investment, also slows productivity growth. And that slower growth and productivity means slower overall economic growth. We found in that study that the slowdown was about 0.8 percentage points annually in lost annual GDP growth. That sounds like a small number, but over time that adds up to quite a bit. That slower growth caused by regulatory accumulation resulted in an economy that was about $4 trillion smaller in 2012 than it could have been without regulatory accumulation. The second point is on regulation and emerging technology. Regulations can sometimes block the adoption of new technologies. For instance, automated track inspection technology in freight rail has been successfully piloted and shown to be at least as safe as manual inspections while enhancing productivity. Yet the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, denied Norfolk Southern's request for broader implementation, citing, quote, uncertainty and potential risks. Ironically, this stance delays not just productivity enhancements, but also actual safety improvements relative to manual inspections. Third, the average time to complete an environmental impact statement required under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is about 4.5 years. A large portion of major infrastructure projects also encounter significant NEPA-related legal challenges, typically adding another 1 to 3 years to the process. Such delays not only postpone, but sometimes completely discourage investment in crucial infrastructure projects and the productivity gains that those projects would deliver. Fourth, if there is going to be some form of regulation, then uniform regulatory standards will be crucial in that working. This is particularly true in transportation networks. I'll use another example from the FRA. In 2024, the FRA issued a rule that mandated a minimum cruise size of 2. The FRA's final rule made the point, quote, if the issue of cruise size safety is left to be governed by a patchwork of state laws, logistically it may become impossible for a railroad to even consider operations with fewer than 2 crew members, end quote. At the time, at least 11 states required most freight trains to operate with at least 2-person crews. The FRA's final rule preempts these state laws and would at least attempt to offer a path for a railroad to demonstrate that a 1-person crew can meet the same safety requirements as a 2-person crew and seek approval of the 1-person operation. Now, the FRA's crew size rule remains imperfect, as its requirement for a risk assessment that must identify and assess all possible hazards in a proposed operation is unnecessarily fraught with uncertainty and egregiously burdensome. But the concept is a good one. Regulations should have a pathway for technological improvements built into them. In the railroad industry, human error is the greatest source of risk in train operations, and if the goal is safety, the FRA should hope that railroads continue to invest in technologies that minimize the opportunity for human error, including more automation.
Hi, recording engineer.
We're back? All right.
You think it's fine? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman and distinguished members. My name is Yossi Sheffi. I'm a professor of engineering system at MIT, director of the MIT Center for Transportation Logistics. I was asked to inform the committee on two subjects: the challenges to increase domestic manufacturing, and specifically about the required workforce skill for efficient manufacturing. The views here are mine and not MIT's. So what can be done to support reshoring of manufacturing? First of all, investing in automation, robotics, AI, machine learning, whatever. This reduced somewhat the reliance on manual labor, which we have a problem with. Most manufacturing plants cannot hire enough workers. But from supply chain point of view, it is not enough to talk about reshoring, because we have to invest in domestic resources of material and intermediate processing. Just moving the last stage of manufacturing, assembly, into the United States is meaningless, because we don't change the reliance on China and others. This is expensive, of course, but we have to decide if we want to depend on China and possibly relax some environmental regulations. And I like, clean air and clean water just like the next guy. I also don't like reliance on China. So it's a trade-off. We have to build this. We have to do some of it, but it seems that one side argue for green, another side argue for, we cannot get the balance here. We talk about another point is targeted help, like part of the Defense Production Act, which are aimed directly at supporting domestic manufacturing. I'm sorry to say, you guys always load it with unrelated ideas and unrelated things, which is kind of, I don't know, doesn't focus on the problem. I'm not political, really not, but some of it just cannot avoid it. Of course, investing in infrastructure. And again, my colleague talked about regulation, which are hampering investment in high tech, investment in infrastructure, something on the short term right away that will help every company. Again, try not to be political, but reduce tariff uncertainty. It's the uncertainty that's killing us, killing companies. It's a supply chain executive can deal with any hand that you throw at them. You tell them what the tariff is, 50%, whatever, but don't change it every other Friday, please. I mean, because people buy and create too much inventory and lose money, and they just freeze. They don't invest. They don't hire people. So it's an issue. Now, the second related issue, very much related to this, is the skills of the US workforce. One of the main challenges in reshoring is the lack of manpower. Who will exactly work in all this new plant? I can give you some examples later if we have time. There are two countervailing issues here. First of all the plants that are going to come are going to be new plants. They're going to be high-tech plants. So they're not going to need as many workers, but we still don't have enough workers with the right qualification to run this plant. The education, I don't have to tell you, this is all the media. The US is falling behind on K-12 education. Johnny cannot read, with the exception of special schools. So you see here, what can we do? Religious, private, magnet school. In many states, parents do not have the fund. In my state, Massachusetts, you don't have the funds to go, if you want a kid to go to a special school, you can do it on your own, which means that we bifurcate the population. The people who can afford it will send the kid to special school. The people who do not will send the kids to school controlled by union. Again, try not to be political, but just mentioning facts. Universities. You were not here before when the two people with kafiyas attacking me. About 20 minutes ago. They were escorted out. Ridiculous. They are disrupting studies in Harvard, in MIT, in Columbia, in all of these places. So universities became obsessed with things other than merit and learning and coming up with the best research and the best student education. So it's K to 12, it's also universities. So what is missing the most? I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. Give me one more minute, 60 seconds. So, give me one more minute. So, people always ask me, friends always ask me, where should I send my kid to school? Sometimes I send them to Texas. Other time I tell them, don't send them to university. Send them to trade school. Send them to people who will be plumber, electrician, operator of numerical control machineries, operator of factory robots. So high-level trade schools, better trade school is what is desperately needed. These, by the way, are the last positions that AI is going to replace. AI may replace people like us. But of course, but it's not going to replace the plumber who comes to your home to fix the stuff. By the way, my plumber drives a Rolls Royce. Just saying. It's absolutely true. Today, last point. Talking about non-political, changing immigration laws. Advanced countries are thinking about what they need. So the UK allow nurses to come in because they don't have enough nurses. Tom Friedman wrote that several years ago, a person gets a physics degree from MIT, we should staple a green card on the diploma. Because these are people that we need. So what we do, we educate them and we send them to make China a big competitor. Anyway, let me stop here.
Doctor, thank you for your endorsement of my talent-based immigration bill. Dr. Rodrigue.
My turn. Can we reset the clock, please? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about mostly a focus about ports and their relationship with logistics. And I will start with a blunt statement that the United States is no longer a commercial maritime power. Its power or its capability to project trade has been outsourced and offshored to the usual suspects. So that's one thing we have to bear this in mind. We have very limited level of control on our maritime trade. Our ports, it's a different story. And here I'm going to talk about what I think about 6 major barriers to port logistics in the United States. The first one is pretty obvious. We are victims of our success in some ways. That is, we are a very strong generator of wealth and economic growth, and therefore, each time we have wealth and growth, we have port traffic, growth in TUs. And each year, we add about close to 1.6 million TU, 20-foot equivalent unit. That's a lot of boxes. And each time you have traffic, you need infrastructure. And the ports are struggling to keep up with this. They are a phase of growth and decline, but we have a little bit of problem. So let's say since 2010, we added 3 Canadas, or the equivalent of 3 Canadas or 2 Mexicos in terms of volume. So that's the first barrier. We have a difficult time to provide infrastructure to support port logistics. And of course, this infrastructure is subject to vulnerabilities. That's one of my greatest fears is port infrastructure failure. The latest one was when a ship hit a bridge in Baltimore, which completely messed up port, ro-ro and car supply chain. So that's the first barrier. Second one is the scale. The whole business is based upon the concept of economies of scale. The bigger, the better, which makes a lot of sense. However, the ships are getting so big these days that the great majority of them cannot enter ports on the East Coast. And the ports on the East Coast, since the expansion of the Panama Canal in 2016, are now trying to restructure themselves around a new standard. And we have a little bit of a tough time because the shipping lines are privately owned. The ports are essentially public infrastructure. So we provide investment in public infrastructure to benefit, in some ways, private interests, which is okay. However, it's a little bit of a catch-up game, and it's excessively expensive. We have a problem with dredging as well. So this is another very important issue, the scale of the things in the United States. Then the third barrier I see is the composition of the traffic. What comes in is completely different of what comes out in containers. What comes in? Retail goods. Usual Walmart, Target, all that stuff. It's the great majority of our imports. Exports, commodities, agricultural goods, even recycled goods. The leading exporter of American port is fresh air. That is empty boxes that comes out. So we have a very big problem between the composition of what comes in and the composition of what comes out. And there's also very strong seasonality to it, which creates what level of infrastructure you need to provide according to the retail cycle fluctuation. So that's a little bit of a problem. How we address that? You cannot. That's the problem with ports. We are addressing issue which cannot. Maybe reshoring is, I would say, a strategy behind this, but still, we have a little bit of a problem. The other problem we have also is the issue of imbalances. We have a staggering imbalances in our trade. That is, what comes in terms of container is basically full container, what comes out are empty containers. And the problem is the shipping lines want their container on the ocean. They don't want their containers to go inland. And therefore, it has a detrimental effect sometimes to exporters that have difficulties finding boxes. Because the priority is to have port-centric logistics, bring the container in, empty them, and bring them back to the sea across the Pacific to be reloaded. So that's also another challenge that we're facing. And solution, there's none, unless the trade regime changes. That's another issue. Fifth barrier is technology and labor. We have a very powerful labor unions that control, labor. And that creates some problem because their stance have been continuously anti-innovation, anti-automation these days. Their goal is quite logical, very easy to understand. They want to protect their constituent, but they're now in the rent extraction business. That is, they becoming some kind of a struggle on trade. The port of the United States have a very difficult time to automate. There are restrictions toward automation, and we're running out of land. We cannot build new port infrastructure. The only way you can increase the density, the productivity is through automation. It has to come up down the line. But obviously, we're going to have serious issues in negotiation with labor to do something like that. And again, very difficult time. The last barrier is a matter of efficiency. Unfortunately, from a time handling perspective, American ports are among the not very, very productive. Actually, I have a shocking evidence that the United States are 30% less efficient than the global average. Most Chinese ports are 100% more efficient than the global average in terms of time it takes to turn around a ship. So again, all of this is related to the trade imbalances, the lack of automation, logistical issues at ports. So we have some problems. So in the sense that's my assessment of the situation, we need some kind of a better or coordinated national port infrastructure strategy. We have part of a maritime academy. Our enrollment is declining while the demand, we cannot, there's the supply of labor compared to the demand does not match. There's a huge demand and we don't have enough labor.
Madam Senator.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Sujai Shivakumar, Director of Renewing American Innovation at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he also serves as a senior fellow. Dr. Shivakumar is an expert in U.S. competitiveness and innovation. Prior to his current role, he directed the Innovation Policy Forum at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and led major studies of U.S. policies on advanced manufacturing, small business growth, workforce development, and entrepreneurship. Welcome, Dr. Shivakumar, and I look forward to your testimony, and you're now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Chairman Schweikert, ranking member Hassan, and distinguished members of the committee. CSIS, as you mentioned, is a bipartisan nonprofit policy research organization dedicated to advancing practical ideas to address the world's challenges. Our mission is to define the future of national security. The program on renewing American innovation attaches the idea of innovation to national security with the goal of revitalizing our nation's innovation system to enhance our nation's economic competitiveness and strengthen our security in the new world order. CSIS itself does not take any policy positions, so the views represented here are my own. So let me again start by thanking the committee for holding this important hearing. In my remarks, I just want to emphasize why centering manufacturing is really important for our nation's ecosystem. Our nation's innovation system for the past 7-8 decades has been focused on an R&D strategy. I've been arguing that we need to move manufacturing and the infrastructure that supports manufacturing back into the center of our strategy. So let me just highlight 3 main points in my quick remarks to you today. First, rebuilding US capacity to innovate and manufacture advanced technology is critical for our economic competitiveness and our national security. Again, for decades, our economic orthodoxy prioritized short-term benefits of offshoring manufacturing. But now we find that this strategy has hollowed out our manufacturing sector, not only devastating many of our communities, but also weakening the link between research and production. So this broken transmission means that US firms are increasingly unable to convert new ideas into competitive products or rapidly scale up and develop weapons and other efforts to enhance our national security advantage. Our urgent task then is to build up and scale up the manufacturing infrastructure within our ecosystem. Recent federal legislation have begun to actually address this challenge. As you know, the Bipartisan CHIPS Act was spurred by a pandemic-era realization that our semiconductor manufacturing had become alarmingly concentrated in Asia, which posed major risks to our nation's security and economic well-being. Roughly 95% of the CHIPS Act's incentives support semiconductor fabrication. And in turn, the construction of semiconductor fabs now underway has exposed the fact that we need to regain our footing in manufacturing. We also need to rapidly and urgently upgrade our workforce, our infrastructure, and our regulatory framework. My second point is that federal, state, and local governments must partner to develop the ecosystem where innovation and manufacturing can actually reinforce each other and thrive. We need to support, as my colleague mentioned, our high-skill and technical skill and high-skill technical workforce. We're now digging out from decades of underinvestment and neglect in our vocational education programs and apprenticeship systems. For example, the lack of alignment between firm needs, community colleges, and state governments, for example, has created a fragmentation between industry needs and the available talent in our population. We also need to urgently upgrade our infrastructure. Advanced manufacturing, including semiconductors, relies on reliable, high-capacity power, water, and transportation infrastructure. The United States needs to make infrastructure investments into utilities and supply chains, and the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are proactive instruments to support innovation and manufacturing in this regard. We also need to modernize our regulations, a point already touched in this panel. As you've already heard, permitting delays can stretch for years. We heard that NEPA can add 4 to 5 years additional time for the build-out of the fabs that are now going underway in various parts of our country. So streamlining regulatory frameworks to ensure clarity, speed, and predictability while still safeguarding environmental and community protections are really essential for building and manufacturing at scale and speed. My final point is that a tariff-only strategy that does not address the workforce development and infrastructure build-out and regulatory relief for renewing U.S. manufacturing will not be effective. I understand that the threat of high tariffs is now being used as a negotiating tool in trade talks. And in making the case for tariffs, the administration has argued that higher import costs will stimulate domestic production. While there's unquestionably a need to address unfair trade practices and non-market behavior by other countries, relying on tariffs alone in today's era of globalized innovation and manufacturing is not sufficient to convince firms to rebuild the industrial capacity in the United States. In fact, high or volatile tariffs can introduce uncertainty that discourages private investment and may even risk the development of alternate supply chains that basically bypass the United States. So in summary, we face a national security imperative to place manufacturing back in the center of our nation's innovation strategy. And that strategy must rest on a solid ground, supported by skilled workers, reliable infrastructure, and modern regulatory systems. So let me pause here and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that. As is an idiosyncrasy, I'm going to actually go last because I like to sort of wrap up everything and figure out what everyone said. I'm going to have Ms. Sparks. Why don't you go first and then, or do you want to do your opening statement now?
Why don't I, yeah.
Okay, let's do that because you may have to abandon us.
I will try not to, and I thank the committee for their patience as we're juggling a number of hearings this morning on the other side of campus. I want to begin by thanking Chairman Schweikert for calling today's hearing on such an important topic, and by thanking your staff as well for the work we've done together on this hearing. And for our 4 witnesses, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning and sharing your expertise. It is greatly appreciated. I join Chairman Schweikert in recognizing how important it is that we modernize our supply chains and strengthen manufacturing here in the United States, especially as we work to outcompete China. As is often the case, the chairman and I are in full agreement on the problem and probably agree on about 80% of the solution. And I think that's a pretty good start. And to Dr. Sheffi's comments, this is group decision-making in a democracy. But when we can find out that we really agree on a lot, we can make some progress. In the last several years, we've seen increased investment in critical technology manufacturing across the country, including new funding for projects in my home state of New Hampshire. These new investments have been spurred in part by legislation like the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act, which is helping us to strengthen our supply chains and outcompete countries like China by investing in American research and manufacturing. In addition, energy tax cuts in the Inflation Reduction Act and funding in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are driving investment in the energy production and infrastructure that will support modern supply chains. To capitalize on these investments, deliver for the American people, and support private sector growth, we also need to streamline regulations. Doing so is essential to advancing American innovation and manufacturing. Lastly, I just want to raise my concerns that a couple of our witnesses have also raised that President Trump's actions have threatened the progress that we've started to see in recent years. His erratic tariffs are slowing manufacturing investment, and his moves to slash funds for cutting-edge research will make it harder for the United States to develop and produce our own technology. If the United States gives up on scientific research, China will fill the gap. I hope that conversations like the one we're having this morning will help us move forward with bipartisan efforts to strengthen U.S. manufacturing, our supply chains, and advanced technologies so all of our people can thrive and so that we can continue to lead the world. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate for this hearing. I actually, Dr. Sheffi, I enjoyed your testimony. It was very common sense, not political, but really that is a conversation we need to have. I completely agree with you that we talk about a lot of irrelevant things and not really dealing with issues that are relevant and try to find at least common ground. So what I wanted to just kind of have a discussion, you mentioned a few big issues that we need to deal with. We do need to have automation. And definitely, we don't want government to spend money in investment. That's the worst entity to make decisions. But what do you believe, the biggest barriers for businesses, or maybe some incentives that maybe we need to reshuffle, which I agree with you, we could make changes several times a year and sometimes retroactively. That is really bad for businesses. But, what are the other things with EPA or other regulations or some other things that believe would be, there's something that incentivize more automations or maybe barriers that we need to do. And I think the second thing you deal with really skills and shortages of proper skills, because I agree with you, we don't want to have the logistics and putting together some of these phones, which cost not that much, here, which is not really stops our dependencies in China. We want to have advanced type of manufacturing done in the country. So if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, I would appreciate that. Yes, Dr. Sheffi.
Thank you very much for your question. Let me change the whole U.S. policy. No, you talk about something that I mentioned before, the uncertainty. The uncertainty is killing businesses. Look, I was in a big conference of chief supply chain officers when President Trump announced the new tariff regimes. The response was, you'll be surprised, was just another day in the office. Because at that point, we thought, this is it. Okay, we can do something. We can deal with anything. But what we cannot deal is the unknown, the question that is changing. My colleague here talked about regulation. He's an expert in this. Maybe he can add, specific ideas. But look, I visited ports just to go on another point, I visited ports in Dubai and Singapore and Shanghai and Rotterdam. And if you want to get depressed, do the same tour that I did and visited the port of LA or any other port in the United States. You'll just get depressed. I teach in schools all over the world. MIT has good students, Stanford, good students. You know, elite universities have, by and large, good students, even though, let me be the first to say, the level of teaching is going down because the students who are coming are not that well prepared. And for a whole lot of ideological reasons. So the administration, let me go a step back. Again, can't avoid politics here. The administration, I understand why all the tariffs are happening. It is true that the imbalance with China is unsustainable, that China is eating our lunch, and not in a fair way.
Right, but what I just wanted to, and understand, and we'll, there is a lot of negotiation, a lot of things are going to happen, and everyone understand we need to have predictable framework, and we're working on that. But we also, for businesses to be attracted, we have some weaknesses. We have some weaknesses on education, on skills preparedness, and there is some things, or regulatory environment where really it's so much and so long to take it, so every company is going to look, we say, yeah, we want to bring job home, but the businesses, it's not cost effective, it's too time consuming, and we don't have skilled labor. What do you think we should prioritize, maybe looking at some, as you said, maybe preparedness, more with technical skills, maybe we should start doing more in K through 12 and post-secondary education, and maybe we'd have too many perverse incentives to everyone go to college with worthless diploma that the people cannot get jobs. I mean, what do you think, and you kind of point out, I taught a little bit at college myself, and I've seen that decline of kids' inability to learn, and in this fast-paced environment is even more important because it's changing a lot. What do you think we should really start prioritize that we look at the relevant things that we can control?
Very quickly, the things that they control. I don't know if it's a federal issue or state, allow parents to choose schools. This will increase significantly the use of Catholic school. I'm Jew. I know so many of my Jewish friends, I send the kids to Catholic school just because they're better. I mean, it's nothing to do with religion. Or to magnet schools and all of this. We have somehow to release the hold that the union has on schools. We have to, President Trump already started changing the university. Now, everything that he's doing has the right intention, that's the way it's being done, is not ideal. We cannot lose Harvard. I'm from MIT, and I said, Harvard has some part, but each university is not a monolithic structure. There are pockets that are outstanding and help U.S. competitiveness and help you. In MIT, we do a lot of defense work. There are pockets that should be spun off. That's the best way that I can. So just understanding the structure of something that you are dealing with.
Very much, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Senator.
But maybe you should move and sit here. You had all the answers.
Thank you very much. My questions are mostly directed to Dr. Shivakumar, and I am greatly appreciative that you are here and that all the witnesses are here. Dr. Shivakumar, as you highlighted in your testimony, the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act has started to drive significant private sector manufacturing investments in the United States. While this and other measures like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and energy tax cuts in the Inflation Reduction Act create new opportunities to invest in the U.S., projects can be held up by overly complicated reviews or unnecessary requirements that can slow down construction and raise costs. Doctor, could you discuss ways to eliminate barriers so that we can get things done faster?
Thank you for the opportunity. There are three things that we have basically underinvested in this country for the past 3 decades or more. When we started offshoring to China, we got the China price, at least for a time being, but we also got off the hook in terms of modernizing and investing in our infrastructure. We also got off the hook in terms of educating and training our skilled technical workforce, getting our vocational schools aligned with the needs of industry. We haven't also kept our regulatory environment in fighting form. Yes, there is a need for regulation, for standards to make sure that our environment is protected, but there are ways of doing that sustain our environment and make regulation speedy and efficient. I think we heard about the 4 to 5 year delay in getting some of these fabs up and built in Arizona and Texas, other states around the country. Every year that you delay, you create a delay, it's another $1 billion for the semiconductor companies. So if the CHIPS Act provides incentives to companies of that amount, basically to build the fab, basically one hand gives, the other hand takes away, just because of the formalities of having to comply with these environmental regulations. There are already a number of state and local regulations that the semiconductor companies have already factored into their plans. Because CHIPS is a federal program, suddenly the 1970s era NEPA, NEPA came into play, and this was something that suddenly, this was a 1970s era law. We are now how many decades beyond that? It's clearly not structured to deal with today's world and today's needs and the need and the competitive cadence in which our economy competes against other powers in the world. So this is a very urgent issue that we need to solve this. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Doctors, you've recognized federal funding for science and research plays a key role in driving innovation and ensuring that we can outcompete countries like China. Instead of supporting American innovation, the current administration is attacking universities, slashing research funding, and blocking some of the most talented students from around the world from coming to America to learn. Short-sighted attacks on innovation will destroy part of what makes America great and will crush innovation. Doctor, could you discuss how these actions undercut U.S. competitiveness, create additional barriers to future innovation, and block supply chain modernization?
Thank you, Senator. If I can just provide a little bit of context, historical context. So after the Second World War, our manufacturing base was intact. What we found that we didn't have the research base. So what we wanted to do at that time was actually build out the research infrastructure. So if you think about NSF, NIH, expanding NIH, the national labs from DOD and DOE, our research, our university research infrastructure, all of these were implemented at that time. We were also very, if you think about the Manhattan Project or the subsequent, we were very proactive in bringing the best and the brightest around the world to our shores to make sure that our research engine, which was then still connected to our manufacturing engine, was in fit form. And so we have, over the past many years, have the world's leading research infrastructure in the United States. It's a huge advantage for us, both commercially as well as in terms of our national security. What we find today is that that gear in our innovation system is not well connected to the manufacturing gear in our innovation system. Other countries like China, Japan, Europe put manufacturing at the center of their innovation system, but we need to preserve our advantage in research, but connect it to the other.
Right, and I think we're seeing some alignment in our community colleges and our high schools. We have to do more, obviously, but at the state level and the local level, we're seeing a lot of alignment there. I am out of time. I am going to just say that if I were able to stay, I would also want to talk about the role that the CHIPS and Science Act is playing in places like New Hampshire as we are putting together a biofabrication technical cluster that will make it possible, if you need a new kidney someday, Mr. Chair, to manufacture a new kidney out of human tissue and avoid a huge amount of healthcare costs and improve the quality of lives for millions of Americans. So I was going to ask a question about that. I'll invite you to come to New Hampshire to see it.
Senator, I'll make you a deal. I have a fascination with synthetic biology and now the 3D printing of cells.
We're 3D printing human organs.
Well, and synthetic DNA. I actually have one of my staff actually doing a research project on synthetic DNA. You just started another hearing idea.
Well, and just so people, what the CHIPS and Science Act did was allow us to connect businesses, universities, research all together at the site of the old textile mills in Manchester, New Hampshire. So instead of creating 50 miles an hour of textiles, which we did in the late 19th century, we are now creating human organs in those same mills. So I look forward to that. Thank you for the indulgence.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for all of our witnesses for being here today. You talked about so much that's so important, whether it's talking about trade policy or regulations or how do we prepare for the future with investments and education? And it's so important as we look forward. You know, one of the themes I think that came out of the election last year was how do we focus on putting America first and focusing on our future and what do we do moving forward. I think Americans are tired of seeing factories shut down and production move overseas and loss of jobs just because maybe production costs or production time's faster. And regulations, as has been mentioned, has been somewhat entrenched in some of our public policy that is kind of a part of the problem that's causing this and driving this. I think we all agree that if we don't look at how do we continue to grow, make America first in terms of production and opportunities, we won't have an economy that will produce what we need, and we'll be dependent upon foreign countries, in some cases adversaries like China, to produce some of the goods we need. And we can't allow things like semiconductors to be an area where we're dependent upon somebody else. So we need to make sure that we focus on good public policy to address some of these production issues as well as technological developments in the future and make sure that we stay competitive. Supply chain modernization and factory productivity improvements are certainly important. In my home district, the 4th District in Kansas, aerospace production is critical for our economy. And I've toured a lot of plants and manufacturing facilities and looking at how do we develop and produce parts, not just for today, but for the future. And some of the major companies there, Spirit and Textron and Bombardier and so many others are constantly looking to improve and produce aircraft that help power our nation and move us forward. Dr. McLaughlin, in your testimony, you touched on the importance of research and development for long-term economic growth, and providing immediate expensing for research and development costs has been one of the priorities in Congress and always has had bipartisan support. In Kansas, R&D expensing helps make new jobs and helps grow the economy. Can you tell us a little bit more about burdensome regulation and how inadequate tax policies may affect decisions as businesses make, especially related to R&D expenditures?
Thank you for your question. So in the study I referenced, I looked at how regulation, the buildup of rules over time, directly affects business investments of various types, and tax policy is held constant there. So while I appreciate the nuance of what you're asking, my study didn't directly examine the interaction between regulations and tax policy. That said, like an obvious path forward for improving investment in research and development is to consider all ways in which regulation could interact with tax policy. I don't think I have empirical evidence on that right now, though.
Yep. Well, you noted something pretty interesting in your comments around the roughly study showed 0.8% reduction in GDP just based on regulatory burden. And that's kind of played out with some of the studies that we've seen from our bipartisan Joint Committee on Taxation and a Congressional Budget Office that said if we get a 0.8% increase in GDP growth, we'd actually, over 10 years, collect $3 trillion more in tax revenue, which would help with our deficit. And I don't know if your study included anything talking about the deficit and how do we the benefit that we get out of good regulatory policy to help with that.
I think that's a great point. The growth effect obviously will increase the tax base, and that should go into the budget conversation. And I would say the growth effect from this study is corroborated by other studies. I did a study of British Columbia as an example. They cut regulations by about 40% between 2001 and 2004. As a result, GDP growth went up by 1.2%. Again, a larger tax base.
Yep. So, excellent. Thank you. Dr. Sheffi, you talked about supply chains and the workforce and new technologies. I mean, how can we use new technologies in the United States, like AI, to help promote more domestic manufacturing?
Well, first of all, using AI is a general term, but using AI. I was trying to see if you can read lips, that's all.
Thank you.
Obviously you can't. So, what were we talking about?
Talking about using technology to help make more,
use AI,
promote domestic.
Use AI technology. First of all, AI allow you to look at much more data, I mean, significantly enough, and analyze more data. So you know more. Your decisions are based on facts, first of all. Second, you can most companies work in silos. There's the sales, the procurement. they hardly talk to each other. In most companies, and it's not even Congress, it's just in companies. So the idea that information flows seamlessly across a company immediately make them more efficient because, again, they know more data. Then there is the ability, most decisions have to do with the future. You have to forecast what is likely to be. With machine learning and generative AI, we can forecast better. Now, when I say forecast better, you have to realize it's not 100% better, but it's enough better to make a real difference because then your decisions, you're aiming like Gretzky said, you want to skate to where the puck is going to be. So here is you want to make decisions towards what the world is going to look like in the future, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. Using modern AI allow you to forecast better, to take a lot, because the large data set, you can take a lot more factors into account and forecast better. So this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm out of time. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Schweikert, Vice Chairman Hassan, for doing this. Thanks all. I found all of your testimonies fascinating, and I greatly appreciate it. Because Dr. Sheffi and Dr. Shivakumar both mentioned tariffs, I serve on Ways and Means Committee along with Mr. Schweikert and Mr. Estes, and I'm consumed by concern over what the tariffs are doing to uncertainty in our economy. Just this morning, I learned that our imports fell $66 billion in April, the largest drop in American history. I just discovered an hour ago that the retail hiring was the lowest in April it had been in 25 years, and that our net average tariff rate today is the highest it's been since 1938. And if the 50% steel tariffs go through, it's going to jump up to the highest since 1903, which is before all of us were born. But let me move quickly, because in different ways you've all talked about regulation. Every Democrat I know is reading Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein's new book on abundance. So Dr. Shivakumar, you specifically said, that we need modernizing the regulatory framework. So Barack Obama appointed Dr. Cass Sunstein to go through all the regulations and eliminate X thousands of them. Every governor I know always promises in his inauguration speech he's going to set aside somebody to review all these regulations, but we still get all this accumulation. So how do we modernize the regulatory framework in a systematic, constructive way, other than DOGE? Okay, so.
Well, we have an expert on regulation, so I will leave it to him to perhaps give you some more details. But we have, basically regulation, a framework for regulation, which is designed to keep our economy, which assumes that our economy is in a steady state. Today, our economy is in a very dynamic environment. And we were just talking about the role of AI in our strategic future. How do we bring in AI? If we don't use artificial intelligence to basically leapfrog the Chinese in terms of our technological abilities, we need to be, and we can do that. There are, for example, we have what's called self-driving labs. These are robots that are connected with AI capabilities that do and speed up a lot of the lab research that goes on in pharmaceuticals and other areas. We need to be, and by the way, the US invests 1/10 of what Canada invests in this technology. So this is another topic that we should perhaps get into. We need to be thinking more dynamically about how do we, rather than trying to create regulations that around a static object, we need to be thinking dynamically. How do we then, take the existing assets that we have, look at the world strategically, where are the Chinese, where are we, what do we need to do to leapfrog them technologically and make that bound?
You set up my next question really nicely. I want to thank Dr. McLaughlin for the idea of using AI to look at all the, although and I'm a huge AI fan, but I do worry about it, that may be based on faith too. Basic on the, don't trust the citations, among other things. But Dr. Shivakumar, one of the challenges I have with my Republican friends is most House Republicans did not vote for chips and science, which is really, we understand, is our first major commitment to industrial policy in America in the last 70 years. And yet China, who's now grown to be larger than we are and is beating us in so many different ways in terms of manufacture, is based on industrial policy. How do you respond to my Republican friends' critiques that government shouldn't be picking winners when we clearly never had a semiconductor industry, et cetera?
So I appreciate the question. Well, we have, again, looking internationally and strategically, we have the situation where US firms are working on the basis of a market-based approach. They create innovations, they sell them, we get some profits. Part of that is then plowed back into the innovation process, and that's how our system makes sure that it's at the lead. The Chinese don't have a market system. Their high-tech technology companies benefit from the deep pockets of the state, so they're able to innovate at a much higher rate, and they're able to then put those products into the market, cutting into the bottom line of US firms, and then reducing their ability to use those profits then to continue to compete. So it's fine to talk about the market if China was also working on market principles, but we are now in a strategic situation where a market-based economy is competing with a non-market-based economy, and where that non-market-based economy is using innovation and technology as a way to dominate, technology, the world, national security markets around the world. So that's point one. Point two is that I think a lot of people, when they say innovation policy, they think of top-down dirigiste type of systems. When what we are actually recommending and talking about in a sense is a innovation policy, which is looking at the various connections points between technology, the workforce, capital markets, and so all of these systems within our innovation systems, each has to work well, and each has to coordinate well with the others. And so when we talk about innovation policy, we're talking a lot about American federalism in its truest form, which is both bottom up as well as top down. The federal government can provide scale, it can provide focus, but especially in issues like workforce development, this is very much a state and local issue. Can firms work with state governments to get the community colleges to address their workforce needs, for example?
Thank you very much. I yield back, sir. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being with us today. The logistics issue and supply chain issue is something that on the Senate side and at Senate Commerce Committee, we have paid a good bit of attention to because it is essential. If we have the goal, which we do, of repatriating and bringing back a lot of manufacturing in this nation, a consistent and ready supply chain is going to be necessary. And one of the things in Tennessee that I represent is very important to us is logistics. It's an entire sector of our state's economy. And we look at Memphis as being the real anchor in this. Memphis, Tennessee has all 5 Class 1 railroads. We have an enormous intermodal because we have the port on the Mississippi River, and we also have FedEx. In addition to this, and because of this infrastructure that is there on the river and at the airport and in the rail yard, we have an enormous trucking industry that is thriving. So we do look at it as air and river and rails and roads and the importance of that for our supply chain. Dr. Sheffi, I do want to come to you on this since part of your expertise is in logistics, and talk about the importance of establishing these intermodal hubs like we have done in Memphis.
Thank you very much. Let me suggest a book written by a young, good-looking professor called Logistic Clusters. I wrote it about 6-7 years ago. You can find it on Amazon, just saying. It's exactly this. It talks about, it also helped Ms. Hassan's idea of putting, because it's correct for almost any industry. When you put together, people think it's counterintuitive. Why would you put competing companies together next to each other? Well, look at the success of Silicon Valley. Look at the success of Hollywood. Look at the success of Wall Street. These are companies of the same ilk right next to each other because there's a flow of knowledge in coffee shop, in chance meeting between people that elevates the entire cluster. The same thing, and I spent a lot of time in Memphis. Fred Smith is a personal friend. And so Memphis is looming large in my book because it's a classic example of a very successful logistic cluster. And you say it has all modes of transportation, but it's not only this. Because it's such a good cluster, manufacturing has moved in. Because if you want to, today, if you want to fix your laptop, you can send it, you think it's Asus or Lenovo, you call them and you say, my laptop is not working. They say, put it in a FedEx envelope, send it to us. You're actually talking to another company, a third party that fixes the stuff. You send it at Monday night, and Wednesday at 10:30 in the morning, you get it fixed on your desk because the company moved in. Medtronics, if you need a spine surgery, the doctor needs a few tools, but he doesn't know which ones until he opens you up. Not a good thought, but it's the truth. So they call Medtronics. Medtronics sent a kit
Yeah,
of...
well, let me jump in
Anyway.
here. I love the fact that you're talking about our industries there. Dr. Rodriguez, I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to add on the importance of these intermodal hubs as we look at expansion. And Senator Cantwell and I have legislation, the Promoting Resilient Supply Chains Act, over on the Senate side, which would try to foster some of this. So I'd like to get you to weigh in on this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Indeed, to segue on, I would say, the authority on this issue, the concept of co-location and accessibility provided by transportation is a very important factor. It creates multiplying effects, and it creates, as we mentioned, these clusters. And once these clusters are created, what we found out is they cannot be easily dismantled. It takes a lot of time, and that's segueing into what China has done. China has created a massive amount of manufacturing and logistic clusters in all segments of manufacturing. And the shoemaking authority.
Yeah, my time has expired, but I appreciate that and note that we are doing that without a government overriding impact. We are doing it via the private sector without an industrial policy.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating hearing. I want to try to come in with as much humility as a member of Congress is capable of mustering. I'm getting flashbacks to my first boss when I got to grad school, who came into my office one day and said, I need you to do some work to prove my pre-existing theories. And with that in mind, I have a pre-existing theory, and Dr. Shivakumar, let me share with you the theory and just see if you share it. I was 20 years in the energy industry before I came to Congress, both as a manufacturer and as a utility operator, did a lot of work with manufacturers. We were taking over their operations. And over that 20 years, both for our company and for the companies we served, you had the globalization trends, the financialization of our economy trends, everybody learning just-in-time manufacturing, the rise of shareholder capitalism. Everybody skinnied up their inventories because the financial markets were saying you can't have that much working capital anymore. And on the manufacturing side, any CEO who wanted to keep their job had to look out and say, I got 3 factories running 70% capacity factor, shut at least one of them down, get everything up to 90%. And that created a ton of shareholder wealth, but also essentially made the system more brittle. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter some data into the record from the St. Louis Fed on the inventory to sales ratio over the last 30 years. And it's down about 20% over that period. And when we've had volatile points in our economy, like the 2008 financial crisis, like the COVID crisis, you see this huge spike where 100% of US economic activity is explained by inventory shifts, right? And so I guess my first question, Dr. Shivakumar, is do you buy my theory? Like, have I got that basically right as far as like a sectoral trend and what's made our supply chains more brittle?
Yes, your narrative is accurate. I mean, we have been, our strategy has been assuming that there will be basically a strategically calm, relatively calm world where we can outsource parts of our productive activities without harming our own domestic innovation system and our manufacturing system. That has not proved to be the case because of events that we see now. In the meantime, we have underinvested, as I mentioned, heavily in our workforce, our infrastructure.
Well,
and so we are now, the reckoning is now here.
But I guess, and I'm sorry to be quick, but I'm just watching the clock. If we agree that those sort of broader trends have created a set of supply chains that is more exposed to exogenous volatility, then the follow-up question is there anything currently going on in private markets that's going to fix that absent government intervention? Because like I have a hard time seeing banks all of a sudden saying, I'm going to give you more generous working capital terms, or shareholders saying, sit on a dividend for a while because I'd like you to have some spare capacity.
Well, there are some aspects of it that are clearly a collective aspect, and those should need to be addressed at the federal level or the state level. There are also some of these activities that need to be involve firms and the private sector as well. So in terms of the public infrastructure, highways, ports, and so forth, these are very large public resources that and these have traditionally been the purview of the federal government and so forth because for the scale and the public goods that they provide. There are other issues regarding, for example, skilled worker training, where there has to be much more involvement on the part of the private sector.
But I think that's the tail of the dog, because to some degree, like if you're not building the factories, you don't need the workers, right? So I guess with the time left, the question I've got is, if our economy is more exposed to that volatility, then either we're going to put that risk on consumers, or we're going to have, in the form of higher inflation, in the form of supply shocks, what have you, or government has to step in to play that role. And so what I'm curious is, number one, these are global trends. Are there other countries that have managed that better that we could learn from? And then number two, we spent a lot of time, not just in the CHIPS Act, but in the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA, around thinking about, because building electric transmission is also an investment in supply chain robustness. Is there data to suggest that we did a good job of building those assets that the private sector was not going to get, or what could we have done better? And how do we think about making sure that if the government has to play a role, how do we make sure that we're building the stuff that the private sector isn't going to do, given the dynamics right now? And which of our peers are doing a good job of that?
Yeah. So there is. Let's just take, for example, the building of these fabs. When you're trying to build a fab, suddenly these semiconductor companies realize that they need large quantities of extremely high quality power. So where is that going to come from, for example? So we don't have the infrastructure in place now. It's a great opportunity to basically modernize our grid using new technologies, new resilience, new capacities. If we are trying to become leaders in new artificial intelligence technologies, we need the power to then house and create the warehouses of data, so to speak. So a lot of this we have to play catch up in a lot of these technologies.
I'm over time, but I would just close by noting that as a guy who built about 80 power plants, we do a really bad job of building existing technologies. The problem isn't the lack of technology that'll meet those needs. It's how do we go out and debottleneck the process. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for holding this hearing. I'm somewhat obsessed with supply chains, and there you go. And saw the breakdown during the pandemic, and I was actually thinking, my first thought was just, and I guess I'll ask you this, Dr. Rodrigue, but anyway, at that time, we had a huge problem with the ocean carriers that were basically charging huge amounts of money and refusing to take American exports overseas because they want to come back right away and get some other things. And it was a real problem. So Senator Thune and I, and then Congressman Dusty Johnson and Garamendi joined together and did this bill, which I think helped because it put some more power on the Maritime Commission to be able to put in some rules. And they, even before they did those rules, I think they realized that they had to behave. And I just wondered what is the role of intermodal transportation here, in addition to all the bigger things we've been talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this event, you could say, I call it the Great Entanglement. That is where everything got clogged at the same time. And actually, what we found out afterwards, in hindsight, is the very high shipping rates were reflecting the lack of velocity. Things were not moving, and people could not find, I would say, slots in container ship at any price because there was not such, because things got blocked because of the surge in demand, which was an outcome, I would say, of providing liquidity into the system, a lot of inciting people to, and it created a surge at the shipping line they didn't anticipate because everybody was betting the other way, that things were going down, and then suddenly things caught up and people got caught up by surprise. And it took a while for this to handle, and that's why it became a public issue, because it was entangled. They say, is there anything we can do? But actually there was not that much because it was actually a capacity problem. It essentially started up at the ports. The ports were no longer capable of handling containers because the yards were full, the chassis were no chassis were available, and everything else created a domino effect. And everything propagated, and then the rates went up.
Yeah, it was just such a disaster that we don't want to repeat again.
In my opinion, unlikely.
Yeah. Okay, so coming out of that, we now look at, so things got better on the shipping front and things were going, and now we have these tariffs, which I'm very opposed to. I don't mind targeted tariffs here and there, but I just was in Canada with the new Prime Minister, as we hope we can negotiate those with the administration. Senator Kramer and I and others were there, so it's a bipartisan trip. Dr. Shivakumar, could you just go over again just the risks that these higher input costs pose to business investment? That's what I'm very worried about. I'm worried about like the immediate, yes, small businesses are roadkill because they can't, they're unable to have any kind of reserves that helps them if the prices go up way up. But I'm worried about the investment decisions that are going to hurt us going forward.
So small businesses are, especially small businesses, thrive on a certain level of continuity in terms of the economy, as well as they're also very sensitive to prices. So the high tariffs affect the prices of inputs, and volatility creates uncertainty, which makes increases business risk. And so in that environment, it just makes it that much harder for our private sector to thrive. It also affects our high technology industry. If you look at the aluminum tariffs, which have recently moved from 25 to 50%, they're very negatively impacting many of our semiconductor, the companies that make the tools that make the semiconductors. And so, their costs are rising. In today's world, there are competing manufacturers of these tools, and so we need to be mindful of our high technology advantage as well, vis-a-vis the impacts of volatile tariffs.
Very good. And could you also comment, was it you that said we haven't kept our regulatory environment in fighting form? Was that you? Or was it you? It was you, right? So. Earlier in your testimony? I just thought that was a nice euphemism for the problem. Just what do you think would have the biggest impact in terms of doing something quicker? Whether it's energy projects, whether it's housing projects, whether it's many things to make our country more competitive.
So again, if you look at the fabs that we're now constructing, the regulations from NEPA and so forth are adding 4 to 5 years to the clearance process. And so, if you think about Moore's law, which is sort of, clicking along every 2 years, 4 years, you're already 2 cycles past, and you're creating a fab, waiting for the regulatory, pegs to fall into the circles, and you're already, technology has basically bypassed you, and you have to regulation has to be at the speed of technology. And so that is really something that we need to be aware of. It's no longer a steady state economy or an economy that's technologically moving at a very predictable rate. If you think about again, Moore's law, the efficiencies that we gained, say, from the mid-60s when we first invented, practical semiconductors to today, that's doubles in 2 years, and that doubles in 2 years. So for a while, we were moving on, this part of the curve. We've moved past the point of inflection, and we're now on the asymptote. So if we don't catch up, if we don't innovate and manufacture and be productive at that in that context, other countries, if we fall behind, it's very difficult to make up the distance. It's a train that has already accelerated, gone off the train station. We will not be able to catch up. We will become a follower of technology, not a leader of technology. So getting our regulatory systems in fighting form for the new technology-based innovation competition that we have is absolutely imperative.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Schweikert. I really appreciate you convening today's hearing on this very important topic. And obviously, as has been stated, the COVID-19 pandemic provided a clear wake-up call to us all on how reliant our nation is on imported goods, particularly from China, and also how vulnerable our nation's supply chain is to a sudden shock. So I have the privilege of representing the 47th Congressional District in California, home to cities like Irvine and Newport Beach, Huntington Beach. Vibrant economy, very dependent on a lot of trade, but also just down the coast from the busiest port in America, the Port of Long Beach. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a backlog of container ships, which of course impacted the ability of Americans to get vital goods quickly and affordably. And that is one, I think, of many instances that underscore the importance of this topic of what we in the federal government need to do more to shore up our supply chains and why we need to invest in our critical infrastructure. But I am a bit puzzled by the emphasis on the policies of Joe Biden in the complete absence of any inquiry or oversight into the current president, Donald J. Trump, because when I talk to my constituents, talk to the businesses, large and small, that I represent, I have to say none of them talk about the negative effects of Biden's policies on the supply chain. And quite a few of them, of course, are very concerned about the policies of Trump. Quite the contrary, in fact, I'd say that many businesses have lauded policies from the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, as important policies that are helping to bring back massive investments in important manufacturing segments of the United States, including, as has been mentioned, in semiconductors, clean energy, and energy infrastructure. Just as a few examples, the Port of Long Beach, just up the road from my district, joined the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems, a private-public partnership that will leverage IRA investments to create more than 220,000 good-paying jobs in Southern California, almost $3 billion in economic investments. Kia, which has its U.S. headquarters in my district, Hyundai, which is based just down the road in Fountain Valley, have both significantly expanded their U.S. manufacturing of clean cars based on the clean energy tax rebates offered from the IRA. Hanwha Q-Cells, also based in my district, opened 2 new massive solar manufacturing plants in Georgia based entirely on those same tax credits. We're talking about thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs, billions of dollars in economic impact in critical economic areas. Of course, as has been discussed, the CHIPS Act has driven, I think, $280 billion in manufacturing commitments in a key infrastructure, key critical economic area to the United States. And at the same time, all of the complaints I've heard about weaknesses in our supply chain, concerns around our supply chain, have all come from the current policies, including the illegal impoundment of funds around IRA, other funds that businesses were relying on to make manufacturing investments in the United States pencil out, as well as, of course, the tariffs that my colleague in the Senate just pointed out that have created real stresses on our supply chain, including a lot of the manufacturing that's based here in America. Just as one example, I have a small electronics manufacturing business that I talked with recently in my district, and they pointed out that a lot of their inputs, even the ones that they import from other places, they get improved upon in the United States, then they may go cross-border again to Canada or Asia to get improved, come back to the United States, and levying a tariff each time these parts or inputs cross a border has made their business essentially non-viable. And they are actually thinking about now moving their entire manufacturing offshore because that's actually cheaper than manufacturing in the United States based on these tariffs. So I guess that's the macro point I want to make. I think we're focused on a lot of the past policies and not on the current policies, which I think it's clear are having a huge negative impact on the supply chain, the strength of our supply chain. But I guess my question, and I'll ask it to you all, is when we think about industries and inputs in the supply chain, are there ones that we should be emphasizing? Because I can't imagine that we want to bring everything back to the United States. There are certain types of minerals that are hard to produce here. There's certain things that we may not want to emphasize in our economic policy. But what are the 3 or 4 critical areas akin to semiconductors that we think we should be trying to bring into the United States for national security or other reasons? And I'll start with you, Dr. Shivakumar.
I think the point that you made about the impacts of high tariffs and the fact that the way in which manufacturing is structured in the world is through networks of activities. So very often there are subcomponents which are produced in country A, moved to country B for further assembly. That then becomes a part of some other equipment that then produces a chip in a third country, which then is packaged in the fourth country, which then gets into a product in the fifth country, and then finally perhaps makes its way back in the United States. When you create these tariffs, often these products are moving in and out of the United States. Every time you are creating extra costs in the production process, what will ultimately happen is if the tariffs are too high or too volatile, this network will sort of start building itself around the United States. So what we are really concerned about is, unless we have manufacturing front and center as our strategic objective.
And I apologize, I'm out of time, but are there
we're going to lose out.
A few areas, any of you guys, a few areas that you would recommend that we consider in thinking about strategically what we want to bring back to the United States? Dr. McLaughlin.
Well, within my area, which is regulation, I'll talk about that. I think we could target certain industries for streamlining of regulations first that are more vital to the supply chain, transportation.
And I'm way over time,
energy.
so Dr. Sheffi.
Anything that has to do with high technology.
Okay, Dr. Rodrigue.
We have to move away from a trade regime which is trade by convenience to a trade regime which is trade by necessity.
Okay, thank you. Food for thought. I yield back.
I appreciate, and one of the joys of getting to chair is you get to put yourself at the end, and we have this term sort of, I don't get the clock, so our next meeting is a couple hours, so let's have at it. Okay, like a couple of you've spoken about, it's sort of amusing being someone from the desert. I've had a fascination with visiting ports. This time last year, I was in the port of Singapore, visiting some of the new construction, watching the automation. I've been to a number of them. I've also visited the port of LA and Long Beach, and I saw the same thing. And so, look, the vision for this hearing was what can we make the future look like? Politically, we always have the habit of we got to get in our shots at each other because that's what makes a good YouTube video for when we want to put up our 20 seconds. So let me do my 20 seconds. But we actually have occasions like this where in the Inflation Reduction Act and those, we have language functionally making automation illegal. Well, it turns out my own president actually put out a statement that he wasn't thrilled with the idea of automation of ports. I border on being a techno-utopian. So let's actually play a game here. You're all freaky smart. If I came to you today and said, whether it be from a regulation, from a technology, from even domestic repatriation of certain activities, to incentive models that you've written about, if we could start from, and accept this is not real, but if starting from clean slate, how efficient could I make our supply chain infrastructure? So we'll deal with the products and the desire and style and those things. But Dr. McLaughlin, you already know of my fascination with the automated skids for rail. You know, they're electric, they're environmentally safer, you put, like in the Port of Long Beach, you immediately put it on the skid and it goes to the warehouse it's supposed to go, or the distribution center, to the things I've seen of, the laser measured automated lifts at the ports, to the ability, some of the technology where the container ship is able to moor within minutes compared to hours. Dr. McLaughlin, if I came to you right now and said, you get to be a techno-utopian and design a new port that everything from the rail to the rules to the regs to the automation, give me your vision.
I would try to remove myself as much as possible from picking the paths and let people innovate in ways that are maximally profitable to them.
What are you, a
This is
classic
this is
market
a punt,
economist?
but I mean, the point from my perspective is to set up the infrastructure, if you will, and by that I mean the regulatory infrastructure, the legal infrastructure that permits innovation. And so by that, we need things that are streamlined, need things that are flexible, things that accommodate new technologies when they do come about, because we can't predict all the ones that would come about.
Okay, Doctor.
There are some examples. If we want to go and look at Dubai, that started basically from nothing and became a leading logistics hub of, they have one of the best airlines, they have one of the best ports, they have lots of infrastructure that started from nothing. Now, the truth is that autocracy is benevolent autocracy is the best form of government. They don't stay benevolent for long. That's the problem. So you have, Dubai with money and total control. Yeah, they do good things like China. President Trump was there singing their praises of building everything. But if we look at, there are examples of, if we look at the Dutch port of Rotterdam, Chinese highways. I mean, they're amazing, actually. I go to China quite a bit. There are European trains. You know what kills me when I go to Spain? I can deal with German high-speed train, with French high-speed train. But you go to Spain and they have high-speed train? That's ridiculous. And we still don't have it. To build a train from, in California, the New York Times reported that it takes 9 times per mile the cost of building in California.
It may be even worse than that if you actually...
As compared to France. Not as compared to France. So talk about regulation but it's not only regulation, it's corruption, to be fair. There's a lot of things that are into it that we must clean out in order to get European level port, European level trains, Chinese level highways, Dutch level ports. All of these things should be cleaned.
Okay, thank you. My utopia is most of the container terminals in the world are operated, somewhat controlled lease by terminal operators. They are very large conglomerates, the HBH, Port of Singapore Authority. Mm-hmm. And they know their business. They know how to make things very, very efficient. And the problem is, like anybody else, they don't like uncertainty. And right now we are in a phase of readjustment of the trade regime, which creates uncertainty. We are in a disruption phase of the resilience curve, you could say. And it's going to reach a new equilibrium. But my point is, there are already corporations, which are many of them are branches of shipping lines, that are experts at making supply chain efficient. But when their strategy or their investment hit the road and they encountered the regulatory system, the delay in investment, I saw quite a few port projects in North America being canceled because of regulation. And I say, here goes 1 million TEU, here goes 2 million TEU, because we cannot build infrastructure. It's when we don't have the capability to operate it, but we don't have the capability and create an investment framework which is stable enough for that capital which is already there, that expertise, that technology which is already there. There are companies, they are now having drone-making companies that are part of a port terminal operator. They're implementing this technology. They all have these strategies. But it's very difficult to implement them in the United States, as you mentioned before, because automation is becoming illegal in some ways. We are becoming the Luddites of this world in some ways. And it's an overstatement, of course, but there's a little bit of truth.
You may have just won an award. I think you're the first one this year in the congressional record to say Luddite. Doctor.
Thank you. Since my colleagues have been talking about physical supply chain infrastructure, let me talk maybe just also a little bit about the workforce supply infrastructure. So this has traditionally been a local and state responsibility, but we have basically broken chains between students and workers and their abilities to find the jobs that firms and industries are supplying. So, but there is and firms similarly are having difficulty finding the characteristics and the talents and skills that they need for their operations. What we have the technology available to actually circle this square. So we have, for example, we all use Google Maps or Waze to find our way to a destination that we don't know. It tells you to turn right, avoid a traffic jam here, turn left here, take that bridge, and so forth, turn-by-turn directions. There is similarly a possibility to use software to tell workers to take this course in the community college, top it up with this credential, take this university credit, and work your way to what the industry is asking for. That is something that is missing, and that is actually the technology to do that is off the shelf. On the other side, industry is looking for workers with specific types of skills. So let me give you a quick anecdote. There was this lady who was working at a Dunkin' Donuts shop. She had the skills to manage her shop, manage the inventory, which was perishable, manage customers, manage the payroll, manage. Those skills were what the semiconductor company that was setting up a fab was looking for. And by looking at it from a perspective of a dating app, which we're all familiar with perhaps to some degree or the other, they were able to look at the characteristics, and then they found this lady, and they were able to train her, and to the final stretch. And she's now working in a semiconductor fabrication plant.
Doctor, in some ways, you're making the argument for time for a revolution in accreditation.
That's also a part of that.
And the barriers
but
that creates.
There are existing solutions. There is a nonprofit called NIICA, which actually has the software to do this. And it's just a matter of, and they are looking at this kind of combines like in a turn by turn, aggregate data, user data to put these, to help solve the workforce problem and to get our workforce fixed. So that's a.
So you have human input, you have regulation, you have technology adoption, you have, what is world trade. So if I came to you, let's first do a reference. And it's probably 3 years ago in one of my binders, I actually have it's actually someone's doctoral thesis, but the premise in there is, what would happen if tomorrow you threw a switch and every vehicle on American highways was automated? So Waymo of the truck, Waymo this, and they were trying to calculate its additive effect to GDP, and it was remarkable. The value of time, the value of the fact I can sit in the back seat and do my work, I can do this. And for the last couple of years, I've been thinking over and over and over. One of the things that rarely comes up when we talk about labor force is the fact that the number of 18-year-olds that will turn 18 this year as a percentage of population, I think, is the smallest in U.S. history. Yet our number of those 65 and up in the last 20 years has doubled. We have a demographic issue. And it's all over the industrialized world, we have a shortage of young people. And if we want to deal with the reality of how do you have productivity, how do you move goods and services in a way where you could have that productivity so we can maintain societal growth, lifestyle, those things in a functioning a flat or shrinking population with its ratios upside down, we're going to need a revolution in what is regulation. And look, 7 years ago, I did a silly little YouTube video. Actually had an artist draw a cartoon, and it was the concept of crowdsourcing air quality. You know, you attach a $99 thing to this, put a couple thousand in your community, and you need someone to get an air quality permit to do the motorcycle paint shop. Because we all know putting paperwork in file cabinets makes the air quality cleaner. No, it's documentation for the next lawsuit. But the fact of the matter is, if I had crowdsourced, the moment that person's filters aren't working in the paint booth, you catch them immediately. And you also catch the clowns that are painting cars in their backyard that were never going to be part of the air quality regulatory regime. Crowdsource the environmental data. Well, it turns out you can do that in water and markets and all sorts of things. And in this brilliant place, I've proposed that bill now, 7+ years, and it will never get a hearing because it turns out the current regulatory regime actually has the incumbency effect. The folks that make their money off of being the one that shows up to be your engineer who signs off on your filters, to the bureaucracy that sticks the paper in the file cabinet. And that was one of the reasons for doing this hearing, is there's a way to do, from the port automation to my fascination of the automated skids, to data that you and I, and methods we actually don't know, to actually having an education system that values your skill set and your talents, not where you fit into a regulatory education regime, which all these are, we just, by those last couple of sentences, just enraged all our constituencies, because those barriers to entry, those regulations, those business models are how they make a living. And so what I'm begging from all of you is give us an idea. It's, okay, so regulation's a huge barrier. Is there a way where my vision of using AI, using crowdsourcing, revolutionizes it? The value of push, adopt the next generation of technology. Those of us that have a fascination in generative AI, but I don't know what it's actually going to do. I'm not as bright as I think I am. I couldn't get into your university. But they sent a lovely rejection letter. So, I mean, am I just rambling? Because I've had stunning amounts of coffee already. I mean, is there a vision here we can sell? Let's go, Dr. McLaughlin.
Yeah, I think one of the problems you touched on is the existing regulatory system and how slow it can be. Right? I'm sure that many regulators inside the EPA, for example, would love to crowdsource some monitoring of air quality. But the path going from here to there, where a regulation allows that, is too fraught with obstacles and takes too long. So your vision of using, say, AI and crowdsourcing, those would be tremendous upgrades to accommodate new technology. Right now, what we have to do to accommodate new technology is often use soft law, have agencies issue guidance on how regulations might look if you were to invent an autonomous car, for example. But if instead we're able to update regulations more quickly using AI, for example, or crowdsourcing, we wouldn't run into this problem nearly as often, this problem being called the pacing problem. Technology outpaces regulations. So I think we can upgrade the pace, but it does require Congress to do this. The procedure is defined by Congress, the Administrative Procedure Act.
Okay. And doctor, remember, our word of the day is Luddite. And is your mic on?
I'm on? Okay, sorry. We have to find a way to overcome the short-term resistance in order to get long-term benefits. You mentioned autonomous vehicles. I deal with autonomous trucks. The amazing productivity. But the top job in 23 states in the United States is truck driver. So there will be people sitting on both sides who will fight tooth and nails against it.
But yet you and I see the demographics of
I
the age
couldn't
of
agree
my
with you
average
more.
truck driver.
I live in a university.
In a decade, we have massive shortages.
Well, it's not quite that simple because it's tied to an immigration policy.
Yes.
So it's Angela Merkel didn't allow 1 million Syrians to come in because of her good heart. She allowed because the Germany were losing workers in factories. So, and she understood it early. So we need, I mentioned before, we need to create some kind of point system like advanced state.
Take a look at my talent-based immigration bill I introduced a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I'd get my head kicked in. Shockingly, I had both folks from the left and the right go, yeah, it makes sense.
Jesus. Okay. One last point. You mentioned the stickiness of regulation. I actually wrote a few papers on the stickiness of tariffs. If the tariffs are going to stay, there will be constituents developed to keep them forever, because there are companies and people that benefit from this. Not only the people who manage this, but companies who can raise their price because the competitor now has high prices. So
your colleague to your left actually mentioned rent-seeking in that environment.
Absolutely. And let it not say that I belong to left or right. I'm just trying to state the fact.
But that is the nature of, remember, and you and I have had this conversation dozens of times. Washington, D.C. is mostly about one thing, money. Usually, whether it be barriers to entry, whether it be direct subsidies, whether it be, and it breaks my heart because, believing markets actually are innovation. And in many ways, we've abandoned that concept. So, tell me, is my utopian vision of, okay, we have a demographic issue that's going to continue to, it hits us very hard, shockingly soon. Is it, okay, open up the border? Is it the adoption of technology if I'm going to maintain a productivity and therefore GDP, therefore, lifestyle, innovation, growth, and how American people live?
It's quite a...
It's a universal theory.
Yeah, it's quite a tall order. In some ways, all roads lead to automation down the road. The problem will be, or the issue will be how this is going to be deployed. And is it going to be a synchronous deployment, or is it going to be an asynchronous deployment? If it's synchronous, you can manage things. But if it's by industrial sector, it's going to create disruptions and lack of synchronization between things. So that's a very, very difficult question to answer. But on the other hand, I've looked at international trade for quite a long time, and it is imbalanced. In my opinion, it is unsustainable. It has created, I would say, commercial structures which, from a distance and transportation perspective, do not make sense that much. They exist because the transportation cost is very low, very cheap, and it has created these global supply chains, many of which should be more regional focus. And I suspect automation is going to incite us to look at regionalization of things, the regionalization of our manufacturing.
So this back to the sort of the hub, especially hub concepts.
Concept. Of course, we're going to still trade long distance. It's going to be a lot of it, but will make a bit more sense, because I don't think it makes sense to make a toy at the other side of the world to move it here. We do that because it's convenient, because there's a cost structure behind it. But on the long term, I'm skeptical, I would say. Although I'm a very big proponent of free trade and things like that, but it went in very strange ways over the last 30 or 40 years. So we've seen supply chains have emerged that are bizarre. But when you look at them, they make sense from a low-cost perspective.
Doctor, can you give me a vision that is not as, let's say you and I actually synchronize on labor inputs. What is acceptable in automation, in the use of 3D, the printing, all the other types of technology? Does that stabilize wages or help us produce wage growth and other things. If I'm trying to deal with a supply chain that it's very fragile, we've already seen certain inputs, and I get a cascade effect, what would you do technology-wise?
Well, just to put this in a little perspective, the strategic environment in which we operate in the world is radically different. And I think in many ways, the election of President Trump, the electorate has sent a message that the way in which we do things has to be disrupted. And I think that's an important message that all of you in Congress also are very attuned to. We need to be thinking in terms of how do we leapfrog China in technologies, because that's the only way we're going to be a leader. But in terms of whether it's workforce or whether it's modernizing our supply chains, these are investments that have to be rethought, given the fact that we have new technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics. All of this has the existing models, as you say, have been gamed, and to the point that they are immobile almost. We cannot compete globally with the existing structures that we have, whether it's physical infrastructure or the regulatory infrastructure.
Okay.
So this is actually something that is across the board. It's not one party or an individual who is.
And maybe that's my vanity of trying to believe, could we ever sell the concept of a much more unified theory? And look, and I just need to throw this out because I'm constantly worried about parts of the CHIPS Act. Love the investment in research and development, but there's a couple great academic papers, and now you see actually doing a much broader error correction on a quantum chip. But as soon as that error correction, even if I have to slow it down, do a server farm that takes care of my errors on a quantum, I have hundreds of billions of dollars in fabs that almost become stranded assets the next day. And there's sometimes the arrogance of what we do in Congress, saying we're going to invest in an industry we like, instead of allowing the technology and the disruption to drive it. For the young people in here, you have no idea what I'm about to say, but there used to be this thing called Blockbuster Video. And if they had hired enough lobbyists, we would have slowed down the internet for them. And I'd like to give you an example. But maybe as much as 2 years ago, we did a hearing here, and one of the discussions was pharmaceutical manufacturing. And I think we may have done it in the Ways and Means Committee. And we had one witness sort of make a point saying, okay, United States, why do we import so many of these generic drugs? And it turns out he had a couple charts that showed some of the precursors that go into like this generic small molecule drug, or create, for every pound I got of the precursor that goes into the pharmaceutical, it created hundreds of pounds of really nasty, fairly highly toxic byproducts. And his point was, tell me how I get that permitted to make that input in the United States. Do you have high temperature incineration? And there was a reason it was being made in India and China, those inputs. So we will have the brain trust, these types, these electeds will say, we want to repatriate pharmaceutical manufacturing. Okay. But the regulatory and also infrastructure of, okay, what's my mitigation of toxic waste products? And those sorts of things. And everyone wanted to talk about the repatriation of pharmaceuticals, but no one wanted to have the conversation of the infrastructure of how do you actually deal with these inputs, and they're sometimes nasty byproducts. And that is actually part of my fixation of, we talk supply chain and how we modernize it. And yes, okay, fascination with port infrastructure, electric skids, and the next generation of AI training and those things, and automation that you and I may have no idea. What does a future world trade regime look like? USMCA, do we actually truly build a North American supply chain that actually is much more efficient? And our barriers are, we have, the Joint Economics staff was kind enough to provide me sheet after sheet of regulatory barriers. So we do Inflation Reduction Act, and then we add dozens of rules that make it so, okay, we have businesses willing to take the checks, but the innovation we just crushed by our own reg sets. Please help us. Help us come up with ideas where our arrogance of thinking we can design what the future economy looks like. I worry that the populism needs planned economy, industrial policy, and over we can show you what we move resources to. Within a decade, it's a stranded investment. Help us plan for the future in the reality of what our demographics are. And it's a very different vision, but I see supply chain making it much less fragile, much more robust, and much more innovative is an absolute necessity if we're gonna actually start to maintain any type of reasonable type of GDP growth. Any last comments as before I throw the gavel and go heat up my coffee? Thank you. This was one of the most interesting and actually learned panels I've ever had in my time in the Joint Economic Committee. I appreciate all of you. Thank you all. And with that, we're done. For any of you, if you have documents or other things you'd like us to put into the record,